everyone! Happy New Year! Today I'll be having my special Q&A video to celebrate the beginning of this year. I can't wait to answer your creative questions in today's video. Hi everyone! If you don't already know me, my name is Midnight Cross. I am the author of Having Faith, a psychological thriller graphic novel about imaginary friends who sometimes don't want to be imaginary. On this channel, I give you tips and tricks on how to turn your manga or light novel into a masterpiece. So today I'll be answering some of your manga, comic, or light novel related questions that you guys submitted in the previous video. We have a lot of really interesting questions to go through today, so let's get started. Is there a practical way to organize the plots in my story? So there is some practical ways to do this. I do admit I can be slightly disorganized when it comes to writing my notes, but I feel like I've got a pretty good system and I feel like I work things out in a way that at least I can work with it. I don't think other people could figure out what my notes mean, but I know what they mean and that's the important part. So what I like to do is I sort of like to have a place where I write down all of my notes and my thoughts, put all of the unique ideas. So if I come up with an idea while I'm just going about my day, I will write it in here, and it might not all fit or it might not be in order, but it is a place where I get to put my notes. Once I feel like I have a good amount of ideas to work with, I can then in another document write down more, reorganize those notes and put them into a context where I could use that for the plot of the story. So I would usually move those notes into an order that makes sense if I want to work with those ideas, and then I would rewrite them in a way that I can sort of read through and make sense of it. I would usually format this from beginning to end, so the beginning, the inciting incident, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. I would usually put it in like that. Or if you prefer, you could use the Kishoten Ketsu style as well. You can learn more about that in this video here. But I like to sort of put it in the plot and then sort of move those notes to fit in the plot. And then I can sort of read through it and make corrections from there or add new ideas and do that kind of thing. So it's a little bit messy, but it does work for me. And if you have a lot of ideas to organize, this can be a really good way to do that. Having one where you put all of the random ideas and then the other one where you sort of organize those ideas a bit more. How do you handle the development of multiple characters well? If you have multiple characters in your book, it's important to give each character a main personality or a main distinct quality that can separate them from the other characters. This can really help when you have many characters in your series in order to make them feel really distinct from each other. As you go through creating your book, you also want to understand each character's arc, which is what you asked in your next question. How do you develop characters further after successful character arcs? What you really want to do is you want to understand what each character wants, you want to give them all their main goals, and then you want to consider what their obstacles are in achieving those goals. So as they go through the story, as they experience various things, they'll be working towards their own personal goals. So apart from the main goal and the main plot of the story, what does each character really want to achieve? And that is the main thing that is important to focus on. In the character arcs, you want to consider what your character might fear the most, and then give them an opportunity to face those fears in some way in the story. This is not the only way to write a character arc, of course, but it is one of the major components in creating a character arc. The characters must grow in some way in order to take them from the character they were at the beginning of the character arc to who they are at the end of the character arc. But that's not to say that once the character arc ends, that the character is no longer developing as a character. It just means that they have managed to overcome a certain obstacle or personal struggle in their own story. But this doesn't mean that they wouldn't face challenges in the future of your story. How do you set up a timeline for your manga, comic, or light novel? This is something I go into in quite a lot of depth in my world building workbook, so I recommend you check that out. That also comes with a timeline building template as well, which can really help with that process. But in regards to designing a timeline specifically, there are a few things that can really help you to do this. First of all, I recommend drawing a horizontal line or a rectangle to mark your timeline. Then I recommend breaking it down into specific chunks of time, depending on how old you want your world to be. So divide it into eras, which might be about 100 years or so, or if your world is a bit of a younger world, you might want to break this down into about increments of 50 years, years, or even increments of 10 years. From there, once you've broken down your timeline into even chunks, you can then write down details about what occurred in each point in time. I recommend focusing on a major event that happened at each point of time, and then writing down how that event affected the world as a whole. You might want to do this in two different ways. You might want to have your main timeline where you put in the basic details, then you might want to have a separate document where you write down the more detailed elements of each aspect of your timeline. That is how I would recommend doing it, but if you need any more help with this, please check out my workbook on how to build an amazing fictional world. When creating a web novel, how do I tell the thoughts in the character's mind? This really comes down to what kind of point of view you're writing from. If you're writing from first person, it's going to be a lot easier to write the character's thoughts. Whereas if you're writing a third person, writing thoughts could get a little bit confusing. So I'm going to first start off by talking about in first person. A good way to separate the thoughts from the main narrative is to write it in the same dialogue tags using the quotation marks and then write "I thought." You can also change the dialogue to be in italics to also further represent that this is a thought. If you are writing in third person, I don't recommend getting too much into your character's thoughts and instead focusing more on the events outside of the character. It can be more effective in third person to use showing more than telling, so rather than having the character's thoughts, instead show how the character feels through their actions and their decisions. But this also comes down to what kind of third person you're using. If you're using third person multiple, which is third person but only focuses on a certain amount of characters, like 3 characters for example, then it can be a lot easier to focus on the character's thoughts, more so than if you're using something like third person omniscient, where you're focusing on all of the events as a sort of distant narrator and you're focusing on all of the events at hand. What is the worst thing you have experienced technology-wise when working with digital creations, and how have you gone about overcoming this issue? Like any creator, I have also had struggles when it comes to digital creation. I can't give a specific time where I might have had issues, but I have definitely been there, and it's very frustrating when you're working on a project and then suddenly it crashes and you lose a bunch of progress. And it's especially worse where in your circumstance when you had your computer crash recently and you lost a lot of your hard work. That is very frustrating. Over the years of me working on my projects, I just create a lot of backups and I make sure I save everything properly, I make sure I keep an extra copy, and I do that kind of thing. So that is the way I went about overcoming it. Unfortunately, when it comes to digital stuff, you can never be 100% perfect, but you can definitely put measures in mind to make sure that you try to protect your work. But I do want to say that it has happened to me before where I have lost a good chunk of the work I have been working on. But sometimes it's not all a bad thing. It feels really bad at the time, but it might give you an opportunity to start your work on a fresh note. You might be able to take the elements that you remember about your work and turn it into something new, even better than what it was before. So please try not to lose your willpower to work on your story, even with computer issues or even if you lost a lot of the progress you've made. Your story is still here, and so there is still the potential for you to write it down and turn it into the story that you want to create. What do you prefer, a manga or a web novel? To be honest, I really like both. But I guess when I started, what really inspired me was manga. So I guess I am a bit more biased towards manga. So I guess in my personal opinion, I prefer at least creating manga, but that doesn't mean I don't also enjoy web novels. It's just that when I started, web novels and webcomics weren't really a thing. So manga is where I got most of my inspiration from and is still where I get most of my inspiration from. But I really like web novels as well, and I think it's a really great opportunity for people to begin telling their story and getting that story out there. What platforms or ways can an independent mangaka get their work published, and how do I promote it? When it comes to creating manga specifically, especially English manga, it is a lot more difficult to get it published, but not impossible. There are ways and means of doing this. Now, it sort of depends on what kind of way you want to do this. There is online publishing, where you could put your manga out there online for people to read online. You could also self-publish it, or you could try and go down the more traditional publishing route. For a more authentic way to publish your manga online, you might want to try something like Jump Plus Creators, I believe that's what it's called, and that is created by the creators of Shonen Jump. And then of course you have non-manga related online publishing platforms, things like Webtoons or Taptastic, which is still an online platform for reading manga or comics, but it's more specifically centered towards comics. But I do also release my graphic novel on Webtoons, so it can be used for manga or graphic novels as well. And then if you want to go down more of the self-publishing route, there are ways to do that as well. There are print-on-demand services like Ingram Spark that can print your work in physical or ebook form and then act as the distributor for that as well. So you don't have to be the one printing and sending the work, they will print and send the work for you. And there are a number of platforms that can help you with print-on-demand services. Another really popular one is Amazon KDP. But if you want to go down the really traditional path and you really want your manga to be published really authentically, then you could try submitting your manga into competitions online. There are things like the Silent Manga Auditions and the Kyushu International Manga Award, which can help you to get your work out there and get more practice and experience, and it could also give you the potential to have your manga published in Japan. And there are also things like Viz Originals now, where they're allowing English writers to be able to submit their manga to them and potentially have it published through Viz. So there are more opportunities now, but keep in mind that the traditional publishing route for creating manga, it can be a lot more difficult than self-publishing it or online publishing it. How do I win against controversy and cancel culture? You can't control what people say in regards to you, or you can't really control people who might cancel you or say negative things about you. And I think if you're putting yourself out there online and your work out there online, you have to be prepared that there might be times when people might not like what you create. And you have to be prepared for times when people might try to cancel you, even if you try to explain yourself or your side of the story. But as a creator, you need to understand your side of the story too, and understand who you are as a creator. You can't control the things that are outside of yourself, but you can control the things that you do or how you respond in those situations. So unfortunately, I don't really have any advice for you on this. It's a difficult subject, and I think it's something that every creator has considered at some point. It's really scary out there for creators, but we have to consider what we want to get out of it and make sure that we are doing it for ourselves and not for other people's opinions. I think you just have to make sure that you keep yourself genuine out there online and you be honest about your part of the process. I think that authenticity will help when it comes to cancel culture or controversy. And it might feel hard to be your authentic self all the time, but dealing with things authentically and genuinely, I think will make it a lot easier to deal with things like cancel culture or controversy. Because if you feel like you have been completely genuine all this time and you have told your side of the story, then that is really all you can do. You can be the best person you can be, and even if there are people who may not always agree with that, or may try to shift the story and turn the story on you, as long as you are genuine and authentic for your own sake, then that will help you to overcome those challenges. How does someone become a mangaka? What steps do they need to take? If you really want to become a mangaka, you really need to, first of all, practice your work. So I would recommend practicing your writing skills and also practicing your art skills. These go hand in hand. Even if you are not planning on being the artist for your work, understanding the paneling and how the story is told through the composition is really important. I would recommend studying from your favorite manga series, so analyze the manga and see what you really like about it, and analyze the composition and the paneling and how the story is told visually through the artwork in order to learn more about that process. Creating a manga is a balance between telling that story through the writing and through the art, so it's important to understand both of these aspects. You'll want to also get practice in writing the script as well, so understand how to tell that story through writing and also turn that writing into script. Understanding the dialogue is the most important part of this process. When it comes to art, you want to understand how to tell a story through your character's expressions and body language, so I recommend focusing on those the most. It may be helpful to try creating one-shot manga or entering manga competitions with your one-shots in order to gain more practice and experience. Creating one-shot manga can really help you to practice your techniques and learn more about how you would turn those ideas into a story. And then the rest of it is dependent on what your goals really are, whether you want to publish that online or self-publish it, or if you want to try going down more of the traditional route. How does someone improve their script writing? This is something that really comes down to practice. It is something that I used to struggle with a lot as well, but with a lot of practice, I feel like I've learned a lot more about the techniques. I recommend checking out this video here all about script writing if you want to learn more about the different techniques involved in creating a manga or comic script, because there are a few different techniques that you could try that might work for you. How does someone research a story idea effectively for a manga? When it comes to researching an idea for manga, I usually like to do it in a slower process. So usually I like to get the ideas in my mind, the basic concepts, and then I would usually just listen to music and keep the ideas in mind as I work on other things, and usually that would slowly spark ideas. But it's also important to keep in mind that you can't really gain ideas without having plenty of inspiration to work with. So if you're working on a story, it might be helpful to watch or read a lot of other stories in that same genre to give you plenty of ideas to work with. And then rather than sitting with those ideas and really focusing on it and trying to find the ideas for your story, just let those ideas sit in your mind and think on it. And eventually your mind might connect some of the pieces and you might suddenly start to consider those ideas in the context of your story. For me, it is a lot better to not force the idea or research process, but rather having plenty of inspiration, putting all of that inspiration in my mind, and then sort of keeping my story in my thoughts while I do other things, and usually those ideas might click into place. This is how I've come up with ideas that I never would have expected, but sometimes those ideas just sort of fall into place. What is the process and steps to write the arcs of a shounen manga? A shounen manga tends to have a lot of different arcs, so it can be hard to really generalize this in a question and answer video. Typically, the arcs in a story are like smaller stories on their own, so the more arcs you have, the longer your manga is going to be, so it's important to keep that in mind. Arcs can provide more information about the characters, the world, or more information about the plot itself. So when you begin creating the arc for your shounen manga, it's important to consider what you really want to focus on. Do you want to give more details about a character's backstory? Do you want to provide more details about this element of the world? So what part do you want to really reveal more information about? And how does that overall work with the main story? Arcs are like little smaller stories within the main story. They're sort of like in a video game or an MMORPG. They're sort of like a side quest alongside the main quest. So while the characters are going on their main quest, they might have a side quest that will slightly distract them in their journey. But ultimately, what they gain from completing the side quest will help them in their main quest. And that's also really important to keep in mind. So when creating an arc for your shounen manga, I recommend breaking it down into the beginning, the inciting incident, the rising action, the climax, and the falling action, or using the Kisho Tenketsu style for them, because they are like mini stories within the main story. If you need more help in developing arcs for your story, I recommend checking out this video where I go more in depth about creating story arcs. When you don't see progress in your journey as a mangaka and creator in general, what keeps you going? When it comes to this question, it depends on what you really want to get out of it and what your ultimate goals are. The truth is, if you are doing this for fame or for money, it's a very difficult path to do that. I'm going to be completely honest. There are ways and means you can be successful as a manga or comic creator though, but it is not. If you're making this your only goal and your only purpose for doing this, then it might be really hard for you to be motivated in times where things might be slower or more difficult. Manga or comic creating is a very detailed process. It's a very long-term goal. And it takes a lot of time to be able to master the elements of being able to tell a story, not just through the writing, but through the art as well. So it depends on what you take as seeing progress. If you're seeing progress as if you're seeing your progress as something outside of your control, like being able to earn money as a creator, or being able to sell your work, or being famous from your work, then unfortunately that's going to be really hard, and it might be really demotivating at times if you are taking your progress as something that's outside of you. Instead, I recommend trying to see your progress as something that you can control. Because you can't control how successful your book might be, but you can control creating a work that you appreciate and that you like yourself. So as you create your work, try and find things that you like about your work and let that progress be something that you make on your own, through your own means. And that is how I recommend seeing progress. So if you want to see progress instead, more like improvement, if you want to improve as a manga or comic creator, then try setting smaller goals for yourself. And try considering where you would like your manga or comic to be in the future through your own means. Do you want to master the body language? Do you want to learn to get better at expressions or dialogue? Do you want to learn do you want to complete your story? Is that your main goal? So it's important to keep in mind that with everything, especially with creative hobbies, there might be times when you don't see as much progress. And that's part of the process too. But are you going to allow those times where you're not seeing progress to demotivate you? Or are you going to allow those times when you don't see progress to motivate you more towards the things that you want to achieve? Because I believe it is possible for you to be successful as a manga or comic creator. But there might be times when things are slower, or there might be times when you want to give up. I know there's been times when I've felt like that too. But you have to love and care about your story enough in order to keep going, even in those difficult times. I felt like in times when I wanted to give up on my story, I felt like, I care about my characters. It might sound silly, but I feel like I need to tell my character's story. If I give up now, I'm not going to tell my character's story. Who's going to tell my character's story except for me? So that's what I focus on. I feel like I have a story and I want to tell it. And so that is what keeps me making progress, even in times when I might be struggling or I might be burned out or I want to give up on it. That is the part that makes me want to keep going. And I think you have to reach a point as well where it doesn't really matter how many people read your work. And I know people ultimately want to make money on this path. People want to be successful. But it's difficult to focus on that as being your only goal in this. Because it is a long goal. It might take a really long time for you to reach that part. But if you're focusing on it just for you, and you just want to have a story that you want to tell, then even if one person reads your book and enjoys it, then there's one more person who has read that story and understood your story. Those are my thoughts. Do I believe that someone could make manga or webtoons their full-time career if they work hard enough? Yes, I do. I definitely believe that is a potential, but it should not be your only goal. If you do want to make this a full-time career, it might be very hard to do it through the normal means. So if you're aiming to get published in Japan or have your manga released in Japan, that's a great goal to have, but it might be a very difficult one. I have heard of people having a lot of success self-publishing their work and then learning to promote their work and getting their work out there through those means. I've also heard of people being able to balance putting their manga out there on a site like Webtoons and then also having physical copies where they can sell those copies for people who really like their work. There's also people who are able to release their webcomic on Webtoons and then also have Patreon where they are able to sort of have exclusive content, behind the scenes work or earlier releases of their series on there. And I've heard of people being able to do that full time. So I'm definitely not saying this to discourage you. It is absolutely possible for you to do this. But it's important to understand your personal goals and what you really want to get out of this in order to get the best results. Understand that this is a difficult path, but it's not an impossible path. And there are many ways and means where you can make this possible. How would you write and format good dialogue scenes between two or more characters? If you have multiple characters in a scene who are talking, then the formatting is really important. Now, this is also dependent on whether you're creating a manga or a comic or if you're writing this. If you're writing a manga or comic, make sure it is clear who the speech bubbles are pointing to in the dialogue. If you're writing a novel, keep in mind that you don't always need the dialogue tag if it is clear who the conversation is between. Give each character a unique voice and a unique way of speaking, and that can also really help to separate the dialogue in the scene. When creating a manga or comic, what insights can you give on parceling time? How much time a day is spent on art or writing, etc.? So this is really dependent on you and your schedule, and a lot of people don't do this full time, and a balance in creating a manga or comic around their work or their daily life. And of course, there'll also be some people who might be still learning a certain element, and so it might take a lot longer to do something. If you're still learning art or learning art techniques, then it might take you a bit longer to do the art part, whereas if you have more skills in writing, that part of the process might be a lot quicker. I do know that over time, I have managed to speed up my own process the more I have learned more techniques. But in the beginning, it might take me a lot longer to learn or to do the things I need to do. So I can't really give you a specific time on how much time you should spend on art or writing, but I do suggest that based around your schedule, you should find a small amount of time, whether it's in a day or a week or even in a month, to work on your series. Just try and find an amount of time that works for you and a schedule that works for you, and then that is what you should focus on. I don't really recommend doing deadlines because that can be very stressful, especially if you're still learning this. If you feel like you have mastered your techniques and you know exactly how fast you work every single time, then you might work well with deadlines. But if you are still learning this and you're still practicing, then I think it's more important to spend more time on that practicing process and allowing yourself to practice rather than being strict and forcing yourself to stay to a particular deadline when you might need more time to focus on specific parts of the process. How can I plot a web novel with a larger amount of shorter chapters? So this really depends on what kind of plotting style you're using, whether you're using more of the Western writing style techniques or if you're using the Kishotenketsu style, which is more common in Japanese light novels. But when it comes to sort of breaking that down into shorter chapters, it might be more helpful to look at each shorter chapter as following that plot structure on its own. So even if it's in the main plot, try and follow that similar technique within your shorter chapters. Try breaking them down into this plot writing method, and that might be able to help you to write those shorter chapters in a way that feels exciting and also helps them to fit more into the main story. So I recommend writing a main story plot and then breaking down each chapter using the same plotting method. Can a flash novel be uploaded as a web novel? So flash novels are really short stories of usually around 1,000 words. While this doesn't follow typical light novel techniques, it could definitely be uploaded as a web novel for people to read. Is it better to put your manga or comic online on a comic reading platform or on your website and have a physical book to sell in person? It depends on what you really want to do. Some people prefer to have their manga or comic exclusively online and would release it online for people to read, but then also have something like a Patreon where people can support them with exclusive content or behind the scenes pages. And then there are also some people who like to have it online and then also have a physical copy to sell as well. For something like this, you may prefer print on demand, where the book can be printed and distributed through the company. Personally, I like having it online and then also having a physical copy, but it really depends on you and what you want for your own manga or comic. What are some ways you can incorporate comedy moments into a manga? I think it's really important to understand your character's distinct personalities and then sort of use that to create the comedic moments in the story. For example, you might have a character who's more serious and then another character who's a bit more lighthearted, and putting these characters in scenes together might create some really funny moments. Typically, comedy is better when it's not forced into the scene, but instead you create situations that are funny and you show the characters reacting to it. You create weird situations or events and then show how your characters respond to those events in strange or funny ways. How do you make an iconic special ability or item for your characters? For example, the Dragon Balls or the Death Note. I think it's important to consider what makes sense for your story. For example, in Death Note, because it's an actual book, it's a lot easier to hide in the character's life. So it's important to consider what kind of world and setting you are creating and what kind of special item would make sense within that world. You may also be able to gain more inspiration from this from looking at mythology or legends and considering how those legends might create certain items in your story. I recommend trying out a few different techniques and seeing what would make sense for your world and for the characters in that story. Are there any manga ideas you made before having faith? There actually was a major series I was working on, which was my main focus, and it was actually a whole lot longer than having faith, and I definitely want to revisit that idea again in the future. Do you think it's okay to stop thinking about drawing and focus on writing and creating a manga? If you're in doubt and there's areas you feel like you need more practice on when creating a manga, then I highly recommend focusing on the elements that you really want to focus on improving first, before working on the other part. When creating a manga or comic, it's a balance between art and writing, so there might be times when you need to focus on one more than the other if you need to improve on it. With the indiscriminate data scraping without consent going around, how do you keep motivation and passion alive in this specific era of our times? I'm assuming by this you mostly mean the scraping for the AI content, and it's very unfortunate where things have gotten to when it comes to AI, and how the AI is sort of taking people's artwork or writing and using it to create something else. It's hard to know how to deal with that, because when I first started creating my artwork and posting online, if I had known that there was AI that was going to scrape my artwork or copy it in some way, it may have changed the way I posted my artwork. I may never have done that, because it sucks that you can't give your consent to your work being scraped or copied by AI. I think in this era of our times, it is more important than ever for people, for humans, to continue to create things, to continue to create art and writing. Because if people lose their passion for creating and stop writing or drawing, what's it going to become? Is all art and creativity just going to be created by machines? So I think it's more important than ever for people to continue to create art or writing, even in this era where this data scraping or AI. I think it's more important than ever to remember the humanity behind the creative process. AI can never take what is created by a human. It will never have the heart and the passion behind what can be created by a human mind. So I want you to keep that in mind, and I'm assuming that's what you mean by this question. You can't control what they do, but you can control what you do. And I think the way to keep your motivation and passion alive when creating is to focus on what you want to get out of it and what it means to you, and put that meaning into your artwork. And if your artwork or writing has that meaning, that is something that AI or machines can never replicate. So as you create, always keep in mind the human behind your artwork, and that will help you to create something that's real. Thank you to everyone who participated in my Q&A video. I wish I could have answered all of your questions. I had some really amazing questions here. Some of these I feel like would be more suited to a longer form video as well, because some of them are a lot more detailed for me to explain than what I could explain in a short Q&A video. But I hope this video helped you with answering some of these questions. So thank you again for watching. I hope you have a very happy new year, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!